The monument to sweetness and shoddy workmanship. The stage for this unlikely disaster was set in Boston's North End, a densely packed working-class neighborhood near the waterfront, largely populated by Italian immigrants. Here, on a relatively small plot of land near Copp's Hill Wharf, stood a massive, looming storage tank owned by the Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of United States Industrial Alcohol, USIA. The tank was an ugly, towering monstrosity, 50 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter, and capable of holding over 2.5 million gallons of molasses. Molasses, at the time, was an essential industrial commodity. While it was used for sweetening, Purity Distilling's interest was far more potent. The molasses was a key ingredient in producing industrial alcohol, which was then used to make rum, a highly profitable venture, especially with the looming threat of prohibition driving up demand and prices. The tank was built in a rush in 1915, driven by the urgency of wartime production and the immediate need for a massive storage solution. Speed, however, came at the expense of quality. The tank was an immediate and obvious problem. As soon as it was filled, the seams began to weep. The rivets, poorly placed and too weak for the immense pressure, started to pop and leak. Residents complained for years. The tank would groan and rumble, a strange metallic noise that grew louder when the tank was full. Children in the neighborhood would even bring small cans to collect the molasses that dripped out, treating the toxic seepage like a neighborhood sweet treat fountain. The tank's constructor, a man named Arthur Gell, was not an engineer, and in a demonstration of staggering corporate arrogance and negligence, he had skipped crucial safety inspections. When the leaks became too obvious, USIA's solution was simple and chillingly symbolic. They had the entire tank painted brown to better camouflage the molasses seeping from the seams. The complaints of local foreman Isaac Gonzalez, who had warned USIA about the tank's evident structural flaws, were completely dismissed. Gonzalez, in a move that ultimately saved his life, resigned months before the disaster, terrified of the industrial bomb he saw looming over the neighborhood. The fatal afternoon of January 15, 1919. The winter of 1919 had been bitter in Boston. The days leading up to January 15th were frigid, locking the heavy, viscous molasses in a cold, dense state. Molasses is about 40% denser than water, weighing roughly 12 pounds per gallon, giving the 2.3 million gallons in the Purity tank an astonishing weight of about 12,000 tons. On January 12th, a fresh shipment of molasses had been pumped into the tank from a tanker ship. This new molasses had been warmed to decrease its viscosity for transfer, meaning it was warmer than the massive cold bulk already inside the tank. Then, on January 15th, an abrupt, inexplicable heat wave struck Boston. The temperature rose from below freezing to over 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This rapid warming of the air outside caused the huge, poorly constructed metal tank to expand rapidly, putting extraordinary stress on the already weak seams and rivets, a phenomenon known as thermal expansion. Meanwhile, the slightly warmer, newly added molasses began to ferment, creating carbon dioxide gas inside the tank, which added still more internal pressure. At approximately 12:30 p.m., the inevitable happened. A sound like a machine gun, the sound of hundreds of weak steel rivets shearing off and shooting into the air, was followed by a massive metallic roar and a ground-shaking boom that witnesses said sounded exactly like a passing elevated train, only deafeningly close. The massive tank exploded. The Sweet Tsunami. What followed defied all belief. A tidal wave of sticky, dark molasses erupted from the wreckage. Eyewitnesses described a wall of the syrupy liquid between 15 and 40 feet high, rushing through Commercial Street at a speed estimated to be 35 miles per hour. The force was cataclysmic. The wave instantly demolished the two-story district headquarters of the Boston Elevated Railway, and the nearby Engine 31 firehouse was torn clean off its foundation, its second story collapsing into the first, instantly trapping many of the firefighters inside. A horse-drawn wagon was lifted off the ground and smashed. A massive piece of the tank's steel sheeting was reportedly flung so far it struck the side of a nearby elevated railway structure, momentarily knocking a streetcar off its tracks. The initial momentum was water-like, flattening everything in its path, but as the molasses hit the cold air and the freezing cobblestones, it rapidly cooled and began to solidify. This is where the true horror began. People caught in the initial blast were either crushed by the force and debris, including the shattered steel panels of the tank itself, or instantly drowned and suffocated by the heavy, sweet-smelling liquid. The molasses rapidly turned into a thick, sticky glue, trapping victims in a struggle for life that was made impossible by the increasing viscosity of the syrup. The devastation was indiscriminate and complete. Pietro Tierney, an 11-year-old boy, was carried over 50 feet and killed. The Clougherty family house, a modest dwelling near the tank, was swept entirely off its foundation and dashed to pieces against the elevated railway girders, killing the mother, Bridget, and seriously injuring her children. Horses were instantly suffocated, plunging into the thick liquid and becoming mired like flies on flypaper, their death throes only sinking them deeper. The rescue and aftermath was an unbearable, sticky horror. The North End was instantly transformed into a disaster zone, covered in a layer of molasses that was in places 2 to 3 feet deep. Rescue efforts were immediately hampered by the medium itself. Boston police, sailors from the nearby USS Nantucket, and Red Cross workers rushed to the scene. But moving through the molasses was agonizingly slow. Rescuers waded, sometimes waist-deep, through the mire. Those who tried to pull victims out often found the suction and stickiness of the molasses made it a near impossible task. Doctors and nurses worked feverishly, treating injuries ranging from broken bones caused by the impact to severe burns from the molasses, which had been warm. It took 4 agonizing days to find all the victims. In the end, 21 people were killed, and approximately 150 were injured. The animal toll was staggering as well, with countless horses, cats, and dogs perishing in the syrup. The cleanup was a Herculean task. Water from the harbor was pumped in to wash the streets, as city workers quickly realized that salt water was the most effective solvent for the sugary residue. For weeks, hundreds of people worked to clean the molasses from the streets, the buildings, and even the nearby Boston harbor, which was stained brown for days. For decades afterward, on hot summer days, some Boston residents swore they could still catch a faint, sweet, and unsettling odor wafting up from the streets, the faint, lingering scent of a catastrophe built on greed. The legal battle and lasting legacy. In the wake of the disaster, USIA, the parent company of Purity Distilling, tried desperately to deflect blame. Their initial stunning claim was that the tank had been deliberately sabotaged by anarchists, a desperate attempt to capitalize on the anti-immigrant sentiment of the time by blaming a perceived political threat for what was in fact a pure industrial failure. The victims and their families sued the company in a landmark class action lawsuit. The legal proceedings dragged on for 6 years. The lead auditor, Colonel Hugh Ogden, heard hundreds of witnesses, including those who testified about the tank's leaks, its groaning noises, and the initial ludicrous claim of the company that the tank was sound. Finally, in 1925, the court ruled against USIA. The company was found liable and ordered to pay a total of $600,000 in damages, the equivalent of over $10 million today, to the victims and their families. The legacy of the Great Molasses Flood was more than just a financial settlement. The sheer absurdity and scale of the tragedy led to a profound reassessment of public safety in construction. The disaster spurred Massachusetts and other states to mandate much stricter building codes, requiring that engineering plans be stamped by a qualified professional engineer and that independent inspections be carried out before any large industrial structure could be used. The Great Molasses Flood stands as a grimly fascinating and uniquely American story, a testament to the disastrous costs of corporate negligence, a physical demonstration of the power of a fluid thought harmless, and a shocking historical episode where a wave of sweet syrup delivered one of the swiftest and most bizarre mass casualty events in the nation's history. It remains, a century later, a story of unbelievable catastrophe rooted in the very industrial ambition that defined the age.